Hello to Frank Fridays. My name is Karline Moeller, and I am the founder of Art Frankly. I'd like to introduce my collaborator, Ellie Hayworth of Hayworth Communications Consulting. Hayworth to promoting intrepid ideas in both art and design, and Ellie has grown her business to command a full scope of services that include public relations, speaking engagement, strategic partnerships, you name it, Ellie can help you. And today we are chatting with Sarah Hoover, who is an art historian, writer, consultant, and critic. Sarah was a director at Gagosian for nearly 15 years, but Sarah's interest is the intersection of social justice, cultural critique, and Sarah is on the fundraising committee at Recess Art and also co-founded the Accelerator Committee at the American Ballet Theater. Art Production Fund, Coalition for the Homeless, Every Mother Counts, and Sky High Farm Foundation are other nonprofits with which Sarah partners often to help fundraising and advocacy. Sarah is currently working on a memoir about her experience with pregnancy, motherhood, the art world, and the oppressive aspects of patriarchy. Ellie, over to you so we can start chit-chatting with Sarah and hear all about what she has in store for us this year.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Karlina and Sarah. It's really, really lovely to have you. I'm quite excited to chat with you today.
Me too. Thanks for letting me come on. I'm psyched.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sarah, as Karlina mentioned, a lot of people associate you with the gallery sector, but you are very multi-hyphenate. And I think there is a lot more to your arts career that is a bit more interesting to kind of parse, at least for this conversation. So as she mentioned, you're also a writer, a historian, and an arts advocate at large. I'm very familiar with a number of the organizations that you have liaised with, including Coalition for the Homeless and Recess. Can you just tell us a little bit about, how you go about navigating your involvement in the arts beyond the gallery sector?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the great privileges of my time spent at Gagosian and in the gallery world is that I developed a really large network of people who deeply care about the arts, public art in particular, and who understand the value that art can bring to society at large. So I feel really lucky that I have a big roster, particularly of women, that I can call for support for some of the nonprofit initiatives I'm interested in. But I don't really see, it wasn't by design, but I do feel that kind of holistically, the different sectors that I'm interested in the art world really complement each other well, from the nonprofit work that I do to what I've done in the last 15 years at Gagosian and into my own life. They kind of all work together, which feels really lucky because I don't really believe in strict boundaries in terms of those sorts. People often ask me, how do you divide your time between being a mom and being a wife and having a job? And I don't really. I feel like I just blend everything all together, and I'm constantly multitasking. And I assume that if someone loves art, that they will understand the value that it has for people who maybe have access to it than someone like you or me, and they can be really useful in terms of nonprofit work.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I also can appreciate, I feel like the art world is a lifestyle. And so the fact that art can blend into other aspects of your life, whether it's personal or professional, is certainly something that I can appreciate. Yeah. Sarah, maybe, the past year has obviously been fraught and has posed numerous challenges, both for the arts community, the artists themselves, as well as a lot of these nonprofit organizations. How have you stayed active with these organizations this past year? And have any stood out as particularly, stepping up to the plate really to try to support needs?
Unfortunately, of course, my engagement with a lot of them has been electronically via the Zoom and all of that, which is a bit of a disappointment, particularly for American Ballet Theater, which is a very near and dear to my heart, but it's based in live performance. And obviously we haven't live performance so far this year, though our fingers are crossed that we'll be able to come back for the season at Lincoln Center in the fall. I don't believe it's been decided yet, but essentially a lot of fundraising has transitioned to being, whereas before it was events based, where we would have our fundraising dinners or chances to interact with people involved in the nonprofit. Now, of course, that's all over email and Zoom and phone calls, but I've actually seen like incredible generosity from the public at large and from the people in the nonprofit space that I'm connected to, who realized very quickly like what New York would look like if it weren't able to support the artists and the creators that have for the most part been out of work for the last 14 months. I think like all nonprofits have just done the best that they possibly could in this, especially that I'm connected to. I mean, they really all had to pivot to become media companies as well as doing what they normally do. And particularly for some of them that really deal with social justice issues and with young adults who have already been traumatized by these systems, I think the past year has been incredibly complex for them. And it's about taking care of themselves just as much as it is about growth. And they've all like handled it with so much grace. It's been unbelievable, but it's been an interesting time for them to exercise new muscles and to learn how to create content and connect with people who we can't physically be in the same space as, which is actually kind of exciting for them because I think it allows them to think, you know, across like city lines and to reach people maybe they normally wouldn't be targeting in different areas of America or of the world.
No, I completely agree. And I think, you know, as someone who often consults with some of these nonprofits in the capacity of media and communications, it's great to see how that's becoming a key tenet in their programming, both for the present, but also for the future when we do return to kind of a semblance of normalcy. So I think all of that is a very astute observation about how everybody's had to pivot. I think all of that holds really true. Sarah, curiously, I mean, how did you get into art? What is your journey to art? What made you want to pursue this career?
Well, I always loved art kind of naturally. When I was a little kid, I have very early memories of, I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is not, at least when I was a little kid there, culturally, I didn't know anyone that collected art, or maybe I knew one or two people that collected art, but there wasn't a large community of collectors. And I didn't really know that selling art was like an actual job. I would visit the local museum, which is a beautiful museum. The Indianapolis Museum of Art has a very special collection that I know practically by heart. I used to go there every weekend with my grandfather, just kind of as something interesting to do. And I loved art. They did have a small contemporary collection. And I remember when they installed their silhouette wall drawing, which I believe is a work from the 80s. So, you know, probably was installed early in my life. I remember visiting it and loving it. And I remember like the first time my parents took me to Europe when I was older, going to museums and really enjoying it. I took one art history class in high school, the only one that was offered, which I really liked, but I definitely think, oh, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I moved to New York to go to school, and then I went to graduate school. And when I came back to New York after graduate school, I needed a job, like most, you know, 21-year-olds or whatever. And I kind of fell into my work at Gagosian, which it's just like a total story of luck and fortune and privilege that I happened to be crashing with a friend across the street from the gallery. And I kind of walked in one day looking around my new neighborhood, dropped off a resume, and I ended up getting hired like pretty much on the spot. But I find it interesting that it was serendipitous and wonderful. And I ended up working there for, you know, most of my adult career. But I also think it speaks to like the barriers of entry that exist in the art world for most people. I'm like, I could afford to live in Chelsea across the street from like an international gallery, had the afternoon off, and like my resume looked right, and I went to the right schools and whatever. So it's really a tale of like being really lucky as to how I was born. And that's something that I think like is kind of on all of us to combat in the art world, because it's really opaque and kind of closed off. And I think if you don't look exactly like me, when you walk into these spaces, they like traditionally don't seem very hospitable. And it worked for me, but I like think that it's absolutely a priority for me to do everything I can now that I have some power in the art world to make those places more open to people who like don't have the fortune that I did getting into that world. Yeah,
I think serendipity is a very great way to put it. But
Yeah.
it is also, it's refreshing to hear that, you know, you've matriculated through the system so successfully, and, you know, you do wield power, and it's really wonderful to hear that you're, you know, you're opening doors for the next generation. So, and I think, you know, something like this Frank Friday and what Art Frankly does, it's about kind of trying to break down those barriers and allow more transparency to enter the market. So I don't know, I think it's all coming full circle, at least in terms of this conversation.
Well, it's one of the great things about social media and Instagram, right? Is that you like proliferate this kind of information about what it's like to work in the art world in a way that, like, when I was trying to find a job, I couldn't look up a woman who worked in a gallery on Instagram, figure out what it's like. And like, I think that's obviously, it's a double-edged sword, and we all have things that we complain about social media for, but I think one of the perks of it is the kind of democratization of information that can benefit people who don't traditionally have access to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, you know, perhaps in a similar vein, you were mentioning that you are currently working on a memoir. And it is, as by the very nature of being a memoir, it is a first person account of kind of your lived experience. And to me, that seems perfectly in tune with talking about transparency and putting, you know, your life on kind of on display as a different kind of window into a reality. Tell us a little bit about this project. How did it come about? You know, what was your goal with starting this memoir?
So I had a little boy in October of 2017, and I had a very terrible and long postpartum depression after I had him. And I had never suffered from depression or any illness before then. So it was like very startling, and took me a long time to realize what I was dealing with and like seek any sort of help for it. So I suffered for 11 months, and it was like an alien had moved into my brain and taken my life, and I was a completely different person, and I did not understand why or how that happened to me. But I was pretty determined to figure it out, because I knew that I might one day want to have other kids, and I didn't want to have a repeat experience. And it also felt to me like very profoundly unjust that this is something that women of all, you know, demographics experience, but it's not really that big a part of the cultural narrative around motherhood and, you know, being a woman. Of course, there are representations of postpartum depression. Like famously, people think about Brooke Shields, who wrote a book about it, but it's kind of seen as something that happens in extreme cases. And I think, you know, you might associate it with someone who like doesn't have a lot of resources or opportunities in their life, and, you know, quote, reasons to be depressed. But I think if you look at my life, you're like, what reason does chick have to be depressed? Like, she has no right to be depressed. And I certainly felt that about myself. One of the reasons I delayed finding treatment for myself was that I almost had imposter syndrome about my own. Like, I was like, I don't deserve to be sad. You know, I'm so fortunate. So I was thinking about all of these things and really dealing with them in the couple of years after I had a baby. And I'm a journaler. I journal every single morning, first thing when I wake up. It's like one of the most important things I do in my self-care and in my daily setup. And after I started feeling a little better, for a while, I was like, I can never read the journals I wrote when I had postpartum. I'll be so triggered. Like, they're miserable. I was insane. I was irrational. I was like horrible. I was horrible to everyone. I was like a miserable person. So I never wanted to go back and read them. And then one day I just like ripped off the Band-Aid and started reading my journals from that year. And they were like kind of funny because they were so outrageous and I was such a bitch. And even though I was definitely mentally unwell, I made some like pretty astute observations. You know, sometimes anger can be kind of a gift because it helps you see very clearly. I think I was critical of a lot of institutions and ideas that I had never been critical of before, because I was critical of absolutely everything. I was so like, you know, just spiraling constantly. And I was like, maybe I should like try and turn this into an essay or something, almost as an act of self-healing. And I kind of tinkered with that for a while. But then when quarantine happens, my workload slowed significantly because most of the projects that I was doing were preparing for museum exhibitions that were to be delayed.
Sure, definitely.
And while I still had like day-to-day work, I had a lot of more time than I normally would. I was home with my So, you know, I would do work during his morning nap, and then his afternoon nap would come around, and I was like, all right, I'm just going to try and turn this into a book. And I just like banged it out. It really flowed and it felt really natural and really right. So I started writing the book in March, and I finished writing it in July of last year.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was really fun. And I am just starting to, I like took a break from it for a little bit so I could kind of come back and edit it. You know, editing with fresh eyes is always good. And I'm working on some projects using the book material surrounding that right now, but I'm about to start offering it to publishers. So I'm not like that far in the, I mean, I did my job, but you know, now I'm at the part in the process where it needs to actually get published and stuff, but it's been really fun. And there's a lot of art history in it. So it was so cool to like go back through my old art history notes and all and refresh myself on feminist art and, you know, all the stuff that in college, but that I had not been able to take the time to really dive into since then. I am really hopeful that it will be published in 2023. Publishing is a bit of a slow and will take a little time, but I think that like it's definitely a story of someone who's like really lucky and has all the things going for them that one would want going for them in terms of privilege. But I think that like if postpartum depression and motherhood was really complex and difficult for me, then I'm sure that it's the same for many other women who don't have a platform. So I just felt like really compelled to write it and to kind of get my story out there in hopes that it would help change the narrative about motherhood, be one where there's a broader spectrum of experience that's represented and accepted.
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, it certainly sounds like it's very humanizing in many ways, but also I appreciate that as you know, I think we started this conversation talking about how art has woven into your lifestyle. I think also taking the opportunity to kind of revisit some of these feminist artists who I think often we tokenize them as feminist artists and radical artists, and we forget that these are a lot of lived experiences that they're probably putting out through their art, and there's a humanity in them as well. So I don't know, I'm looking forward to seeing how you've woven some of these, you know, female greats into this book.
Thank you. It was really fun. I hope I do them all justice, but I agree. Like when I went back and revisited a lot of works of art that I had always seen as kind of like statements about feminism, I realized how they, as you said so well, really stemmed from like there's a Anna Mendieta piece about rape, and I don't know if she was raped, but I imagine like most women, she was sexually assaulted in some way, or she experienced some form of violence. And it became, you're right to say that all of that work that I revisited became personal in a way I didn't understand first looking at it. And it was, I mean, the great thing about writing a book or really undertaking like any project, creative or not, that you're obsessed with is the learning. And like, honestly, my book may never be published. Like you may never read it, but the doing
we hope you do, even if you have to take it to an indie publisher, Sarah. So call me if we don't land a publisher. I don't believe that's going to happen, but
I hope not, but you never know. But like the success in it for me was the doing it. Like it was really empowering and interesting and learning. And it was like a whole new kind of education. And that to me feels really fulfilling. So I feel really lucky that I had the opportunity to even do it.
That's amazing. Well, Sarah, it's funny. We tend to conclude these interviews with talking about how you stayed busy and how you stayed connected. And, you know, through the past 16 or so months of quarantine, it sounds to me like we've answered that question. I mean, you certainly were quite busy last year. And I think there's a lot yet to come, but maybe just in the spirit of rounding out with a few professional practice questions, certainly from someone who's done quite well in the art world, do you have any advice or a set of professional practices that you would kind of offer to the next generation as they move into the art world?
I mean, I didn't invent any of these, but I think that the most important thing that I got and continue to get out of the art world are my relationships with other women. And I feel like it's the untold secret of the art world that it actually revolves around women who do 90% of actual important labor that occurs, organizational on up. And I can't like state enough how important my female friends and kind of like alliances and network has been throughout my career at every stage. And in that spirit, I think just like being kind and generous with people and always be willing to do other women the favor and kind of pay it forward is the single most important thing. I like cherish those relationships in every way. And I think like recognizing the inherent privilege of participating in the art world and being willing to be critical of it. Because it, I think, is really important. I think like you can get really lost being like excited that a Beeple work went for $69 million or whatever without really understanding the implications of the fact that we exist on top of like a very rarefied ecosystem, and that we like really owe it to our environment to be thoughtful and caring and critical.
Yeah, no, I think those are great tenets, and certainly something that everyone, not even just the next generation, should be mindful of in your day to day in the art world. Out of the past year or even beyond, just out of these challenges that we're all emerging from, what's one positive takeaway that you hope, as we conclude this interview today, that people hold close to the vest?
I really hope that people see, after living like a very pared down lifestyle over the last 14 months, probably less, going to fewer parties, buying less clothes, spending less money on Ubers, whatever, that we can all understand that it's important to like really respect our resources. And I think that when like abundance just seems never ending, it's easy to kind of almost disdain the resources that we're so lucky. So I hope that people like really hold on to the lessons of this reset and are less wasteful, like in every way. Like, no, I don't think like we don't need to have 250-person parties 3 times a week in the month of May. It just seems at a certain point like way less impactful because there's so much of it.
It's like the principle of diminishing returns at some point.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think you can like relate that to literally anything. Like, I don't think the only thing that there's never enough of to me is like ideas and positivity. But I think in terms of like actual stuff, just being respecting that being pared down and taking a step back and like being critical of what you consume is really important. And like, I think we've all seen that like the things that make us really happy are being home with our families and being healthy and having beautiful art around us that continues to inspire us to be creative in our own minds, and that like the ultimate version of success is what happens in our own heads and within our own family units, because at the end of the day, like that's what we had for the last 14 months, right? Hope that is a takeaway, and it's something that I like am trying to remind myself of every time I start online shopping for another pair of sweatpants. I'm like, you can do Zooms without them, like enough is enough.
I love it. No, I think that's definitely something that we should take to heart. I mean, there have been so many takeaways from this conversation, but if we're going to end on one, I think that's a very smart one. Sarah, you are very refreshing, and I'm very excited to see your memoir when it comes out. I hope you know that you have a fan in me, and this is fun. It's been nice to have this little chat with you today.
That's very kind and generous. And I promise to keep you very updated, and then make you like buy Instagram it, send one to your mom.
I will do all the things. I can promise you that.
Well, thank you guys. I love art, frankly, and I'm really excited to have this chat with you.